What if I told you that somewhere in rural America, families are still conducting genetic experiments that would make scientists recoil in horror? In 1971, a 17-year-old girl gave birth to something that made 3 doctors abandon the delivery room forever. One quit medicine entirely. But here's the terrifying part. Her family wasn't ashamed. They were proud. And what emerged that day would force the government to seal the case files for 50 years. There are images that medical professionals debate showing because they violate human dignity itself. In a remote corner of Virginia, a young woman named Sarah Mae Whitaker delivered something that shattered everything we understood about human genetics and family bloodlines. When doctors first glimpsed what came from her body, they witnessed the result of something far worse than simple incest. This was the endpoint of a bloodline so twisted, so corrupted by deliberate inbreeding across generations, that scientists later declared it biologically impossible. Yet the records exist. The photographs exist. The child breathed for 6 brief days. But the nightmare deepens. Sarah Mae was only 17. When authorities demanded the father's identity, every adult male in her household stepped forward. Her father, uncle, grandfather, even her brother all claimed responsibility. Not from guilt or shame, but from pride. They were protecting what they called the pure line, a family tradition carefully maintained for over a century in Appalachian hills where outsiders never entered and questions brought violence. During those 6 days the child survived, it rewrote medical textbooks and exposed a family secret so horrifying that federal agents classified the case files, burying them from public access for half a century. Those documents were quietly declassified in 2021. Almost nobody noticed. Almost nobody knows their contents. Tonight, you'll discover why certain truths get buried so deep that speaking them feels like crossing into cursed territory. The Whitaker name first surfaced in Roanoke County, Virginia census records from 1847, when Joshua Whitaker claimed 200 mountain acres that no other settler desired. The earth was barren, winters were merciless, and the closest town required 3 days of dangerous travel. But Joshua wasn't seeking prosperity. He wanted isolation. In those distant valleys, where morning fog wrapped the peaks like secrets that refused to fade, the Whitaker family launched an experiment spanning 5 generations. Joshua arrived with 2 wives, his legal spouse Martha and her younger sister Rebecca, whom he claimed as a companion under frontier customs. The local preacher, desperate for any wilderness congregation, blessed both marriages. By 1855, Joshua had fathered 14 children between the sisters, but here the narrative takes its first sinister turn. When those children reached adulthood, they didn't pursue partners from neighboring families. They married one another. Family journals uncovered decades later in a concealed cellar beneath the original homestead expose a disturbing belief system. Joshua was convinced that mixing bloodlines weakened human essence, diluting what he considered the divine spark God placed in his family. He persuaded his children they were chosen, exceptional, and their purity demanded protection at any price. By the 1880s, the Whitaker family tree had ceased being a tree at all. It became a twisted vine, coiling back upon itself endlessly. The children born from these arrangements were unusual. Neighbors whispered about Whitaker offspring who never spoke, who moved with peculiar movements, whose eyes held a hollowness that seemed to peer through you instead of seeing you. Local physicians refused attending Whitaker births after 1890, declaring the family cursed. But the family perceived no curse. They saw perfection. Each generation intensified the practice, believing they approached some genetic ideal the corrupt outside world couldn't comprehend. By 1920, the Whitaker bloodline had become something defying natural law. What began as sibling marriages had transformed into something far more intricate and disturbing. The family developed what they termed the rotation system, a methodically planned schedule where each fertile woman bore children to multiple male relatives in predetermined sequence. They maintained detailed records, treating human reproduction like livestock breeding programs. Sarah Mae's grandmother, Charity Whitaker, arrived in 1925 as the product of her mother's union with 3 different men: her grandfather, her grandfather's brother, and her own uncle. Genetic analysis performed decades afterward revealed that Charity's DNA displayed patterns that should have been biologically impossible. She was simultaneously her mother's daughter, niece, and cousin. Her chromosomes narrated a tale of such concentrated inbreeding that modern geneticists initially assumed contaminated test results. Yet Charity survived, and more disturbingly, she flourished within the family's perverted ecosystem. She matured believing the outside world contained inferior beings, genetic mongrels who corrupted their bloodlines with foreign influences. By 15, she carried her first child, fathered by her own father, who was simultaneously her uncle and cousin. This child, Thomas Whitaker, became Sarah May's father, though the word father loses meaning when understanding the true family structure. The Whitakers had constructed their own isolated society with unique rules, logic, and definitions of normal. Children grew up uncertain which adults were parents, siblings, or cousins because these distinctions had long ceased mattering. Everyone connected to everyone else in multiple ways. They whispered about blood calling to blood and believed each new generation brought them closer to achieving the perfect circle, a state of genetic purity granting abilities beyond ordinary human comprehension. By the 1960s, when Sarah May arrived, the family had remained completely isolated from outside society for over a century. They possessed their own language, customs, and terrible secret they guarded more fiercely than life itself. That secret was about to enter the world. When it did, it would demolish every assumption about human genetic deformity limits. Sarah May Whitaker was 17 when she realized she carried something that felt different from other pregnancies she'd witnessed in her family. By that age, she'd already delivered twice, once at 14, once at 16. Both infants died within hours, their tiny bodies too malformed for life. The family called these deaths offerings to the blood necessary sacrifices toward genetic perfection. But this pregnancy was different. Sarah May felt the child moving in ways defying explanation. Instead of gentle kicks and rolls from normal fetuses, she experienced sensations that terrified even her hardened relatives. The child seemed to pulse rather than move, creating rhythmic waves across her belly resembling trapped lightning. Her abdomen grew enormous by the 7th month, stretching her skin until it became translucent, revealing a network of dark veins that appeared to writhe underneath. The family was euphoric. The elders whispered this was finally it, the culmination of their century-long breeding program. They'd achieved something beyond human, something proving their superiority to the corrupt outside world. They prepared for birth with religious fervor, establishing elaborate rituals and ceremonies to welcome what they believed would be their genetic messiah. But Sarah May was dying. The pregnancy consumed her body from within. She lost 40 pounds even as her belly continued expanding. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her teeth loosened and dropped from her gums. Most disturbing, her eyes began shifting color, transforming from brown to an unnatural pale yellow that seemed to glow in darkness. The family interpreted these changes as divine transformation signs. But medical experts who later reviewed her case recognized them as severe genetic toxicity symptoms. Her body was literally being poisoned by the abnormal fetus growing inside. When Sarah May entered labor on October 13, 1971, she'd been unconscious 3 days. The family carried her to the nearest hospital, a small rural facility 30 miles away, only because they wanted medical documentation of what they believed would birth a new human form. They never imagined this decision would expose their secret to the outside world, or that the child Sarah May delivered would become classified government research subject for the next 50 years. Dr. Margaret Powell had delivered over 3,000 bobbies during her 20-year career at Mercy General Hospital. She'd witnessed every complication, every deformity, every tragedy human birth could produce. But when the Whitaker family carried Sarah May through the emergency entrance that October morning, Dr. Powell knew instantly she was about to witness something haunting her for the rest of her life. The birth lasted 14 hours. Sarah May never regained consciousness. Her body suffered contractions so violent they shattered 2 ribs. The medical team struggled monitoring the fetus because its heartbeat produced patterns their equipment couldn't properly read. Instead of steady normal heart rhythm, monitors showed irregular activity clusters resembling brain waves more than cardiac function. Nurse Patricia Williams, who assisted delivery, later testified the sound coming from Sarah May's womb wasn't typical fetal heartbeat, but something almost like whispering. When the child finally emerged, the delivery room fell completely silent. What Dr. Powell witnessed defied every human anatomy principle she'd learned. The infant was technically alive. It breathed, its heart beat, its eyes moved, but it was shaped in ways that seemed to mock human form itself. Its skull was grossly enlarged, nearly twice normal newborn head size, yet transparent enough that brain was visible through skin. That brain was unlike anything in medical literature. Instead of normal folded structure, it appeared composed of dozens of smaller, separate organs pulsing independently. The child's limbs were fused in impossible configurations. Its arms emerged from torso at wrong angles, ending in hands with too many fingers arranged in spiral patterns. Its legs twisted around each other like vines, and where feet should exist, there were instead formations resembling tiny faces, complete with moving eyes and mouths opening and closing soundlessly. Most disturbing was the child's face, or faces, because there were three overlapping and sharing features in ways creating an expression of constant silent screaming. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments what you would have done if this was your bloodline, because what happened next tested the limits of human compassion and medical ethics in ways still dividing experts today. The child was alive, but was it human? Did it deserve life, or was keeping it alive an act of cruelty beyond measure? Dr. Powell had 6 days to answer questions challenging everything she believed about medicine, morality, and the nature of life itself. The child Sarah May delivered wasn't supposed to survive. Every medical principle suggested such severe deformities would be incompatible with life. Yet somehow this twisted amalgamation of human genetics continued breathing, moving, existing in a state challenging the very definition of living. Dr. Powell made the decision to sustain it, not from hope, but from terrible scientific curiosity about what limits human biology could actually endure. For 6 days, Mercy General Hospital medical staff became reluctant witnesses to something feeling more like supernatural phenomenon than medical case. The child never cried. Instead, it produced sounds nurses described as somewhere between humming and static electricity. Its multiple eyes moved independently, tracking different objects around the room with intelligence seeming impossible given its malformed brain structure. Most unsettling, it appeared responding to family member presence in ways suggesting recognition, even affection. The Whitaker family maintained constant vigil around the child's incubator. They spoke to it in their strange dialect, sang songs nobody else understood, and performed rituals horrifying the hospital staff. They brought objects from their mountain home, twisted wood pieces, stones arranged in specific patterns, and photographs of other family members showing generations of increasingly severe deformities. They called the child the culmination and the perfect one, treating it with reverence both touching and deeply disturbing. But the child was dying, and its death was unlike anything medical science had documented. Instead of gradual organ failure typical of severely malformed infants, this child seemed dissolving from inside out. Its transparent skin began showing dark patches where internal structures were breaking down, but rather than causing distress, these changes seemed bringing the child a kind of peace. Its multiple faces, which had shown constant agitation for the first 5 days, began relaxing into expressions of something almost resembling contentment. On the 6th day, as morning shift arrived to check on the child, they found something haunting them forever. The child was still alive, still breathing, but during the night, it had somehow managed arranging itself into a position geometrically impossible given its fused limbs. It lay in the incubator in a perfect spiral, its twisted body forming a pattern resembling ancient symbols none of the staff could identify. And in that position, with what appeared as smiles on each of its 3 faces, the child finally died, taking with it the darkest secret of American family genetics, and leaving behind questions remaining unanswered to this day. Within hours of the child's death, Mercy General Hospital was swarmed by federal agents. They arrived in unmarked vehicles, wearing suits seeming out of place in rural Virginia, carrying briefcases and equipment hospital staff had never seen. They claimed representation from the Centers for Disease Control, investigating what they called a potential genetic hazard to public health. But Dr. Powell knew instantly these men were something else entirely. The agents confiscated everything: the child's body, all medical records, the photographs the family brought, even the twisted wood pieces from their mountain home. They interviewed every staff member with case contact, requiring them to sign documents legally prohibiting them from ever discussing what they witnessed. The official death certificate listed cause as multiple congenital anomalies, a bland medical term revealing nothing about the true horror of what occurred. Sarah May died 3 days later, her body finally succumbing to genetic toxicity that consumed her throughout pregnancy. The Whitaker family, devastated by losing what they considered their greatest achievement, retreated to their mountain compound and were never seen publicly again. Local authorities who attempted investigating their property in following years reported finding buildings abandoned, though neighbors insisted they could still hear voices singing in the woods on certain nights. The classified files released 50 years later revealed the truth the government worked so hard hiding. The child born to Sarah May Whitaker represented something challenging fundamental assumptions about human genetics and evolution. Its DNA contained sequences appearing entirely artificial, as if someone had been deliberately manipulating the family's genetic code for generations. Most disturbing, analysis of the family's genealogical records revealed their breeding program hadn't been random or accidental. It had been following a specific pattern, a genetic formula seeming designed to produce exactly what Sarah May had given birth to. The final page of the classified report contains a single chilling paragraph. The Whitaker case suggests the possibility of intentional genetic experimentation spanning multiple generations conducted by unknown parties for unknown purposes. The family's isolation and systematic breeding program indicate a level of organization and long-term planning exceeding what would be expected from isolated rural populations. Further investigation is recommended to determine if similar programs exist elsewhere in the United States. That investigation never happened, at least not officially. But somewhere in Appalachian mountains, in places where outsiders never venture and questions are still answered with violence, there may be other families following other programs, working toward other culminations we're not prepared to understand. The story of Sarah May Whitaker and her impossible child is over, but the questions it raises about hidden corners of American genetics and the forces that might be manipulating them remain as dark and unanswered as the mountain valleys where such secrets are born.